Hello and welcome to our conversation on Naturopod Live. This is a conversation platform for education leaders to inspire each of us to envision what's possible. I'm Bridgitte Alomes. I'm a mother, a dancer, a nature lover, and the founder and CEO of Naturopod. Our mission is simple: to ensure every learner and educator has a practical, healthy, sustainable environment to learn, enabling them to reach their full potential. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge, and my apologies if I mispronounce, the Lekwungen, Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples on whose traditional territory I am live streaming from today. Today, we'll be having a conversation with a special guest around designing an integrated and holistic sustainability journey. We invite you to join the conversation by commenting or providing questions in the chat box. I'm excited to welcome our guest, Kate Mraw. Kate is the design director at LPA with more than 15 years of K-12 educational design experience. Kate, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here with you, Bridgitte.
Well, it's my honor to have you today, Kate. I've always enjoyed our conversations, and I can't wait to share more today. So, Kate, let's get started. If you weren't a designer, what would you be?
Oh, well, there was definitely a path. I heard you mention earlier about your dancing career. That was a path for me at one point, but I've always had a creative gene and an analytical gene. So probably something related to putting together science and art. It's always been about that balance of the poetry and the poetic and aspects of what I do. So I'd figure something out, I'm sure.
So sounds like dance really did bring in that creativity in the work that you're doing today. So what else would you say drew you to this work?
It was always about my own experience in a space. I was very aware as a child. You know, I was often caught rearranging furniture and things like that in my own home, and definitely influencing my parents in our several moves as a child of what our homes look like and design and adjacencies of spaces and how we interacted. And I knew the impact it had on my behavior. I recognized that. And I started to recognize that about others. I was always a quiet child and very observant. So I think that's something that I bring to my work even today. And really through empathy of trying to understand how might others be experiencing spaces and how can we instill some behaviors that really lean towards that healthy and sustainable future.
That's wonderful. I actually can really resonate with that. I'm constantly looking at my space going, how can I move this? How do I add this? I think, having that dance and creative background is something that I think we very much can align with together. So
yeah,
that's awesome.
Absolutely.
So your company just won a big award, Firm of the Year.
It did.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
The AIA California awarded LPA with the Firm of the Year award for 2021. It's such an honor, and it's also really a validation that we're doing something right. Our mission is changing lives by design, and we do that through a better process to lead through better results. So we talked a lot about the work that we've done and really how we guide through high performance, how we guide through sustainable decisions, how we lead conversations with a co-authorship of our educators, our design teams, and those that we're working with, and really understanding how their voice becomes part of that process. And another aspect of it that I thought was really valuable and meaningful to me was also the recognition of the professional development that we do at LPA, both internally for our employees and our growing industry, and also externally with our foundation work and our research work and that impact to the whole industry. So it was really something that we're really excited about, and absolutely gives a lot of pride that we're doing something right and making that impact, and hope to share more about what we're doing so that others can learn from those benefits, right?
That's wonderful. I mean, I'd love to learn more about when you talk about professional development internally for your team, which is something that I think is ongoing for most organizations. And we'll get to the sustainability part, but how do you create systems or motivational courses or things that actually help people to stay innovative and show that initiative and excitement?
Yeah, well, I think it's a spectrum, right? There's the professional development can't be one solution. It's not a mentorship program and the box is checked. It has to be something that is embedded in the culture of an organization. And that can go for an educational, climate and culture as well. But it's really about how we look at each individual and define their own strengths and work with individuals in their strengths to help them find their best fit in their role, in their career, and in their impact, both at a project level, but then also at that firm level. So, we have courses, we have a mini LPA university that we've actually had for almost a decade now, where it's monthly courses that are organized around sustainable initiatives, organized around impacts that we can make. And then there's been side conversations as well. We have little tech talks and other aspects, and offer professional development grants through our foundation. So the professional development grants, I think, are fantastic, because that's where an employee can say, this is something that's important to me, and they can apply for those funds to be able to go and do that professional development on their own throughout the year, and really do that as part of their employment, not on their own volunteer time. So it really is something that we're saying, we're committed to your growth as an individual to make a bigger impact on the whole. So
wonderful. And can you tell me about a time where that process had the most impact on you directly?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a single time, but, I had an opportunity to attend some executive education courses at Harvard a couple of years ago. The first one I went to was the Learning Environments for Tomorrow. That was extremely impactful. And I was exposed to so many leaders, thought leaders and educators. It was a combination of the School of Design and School of Education. And that was really valuable in the impact that then I brought back to the firm. And it helped me find my voice in that process and really identify with how I can bring conversations around empathy and around user experience to the table early on in our design conversations. And then there was another course later through the School of Public Health and USGBC, and that was about building futures for healthy environments. Dr. Joseph Allen was part of that educational course, and just incredible to sort of see the resources that we were offered, and the 5-day kind of deep dive into what it meant to build a healthier future, and tools, being able to go through a professional development experience and walk away with tools is something that's really, really impactful. And then I'd be remiss to not mention, I'm a very involved member in the A4LE organization, and recently got my ALEP certification. So the organization just is wonderful, and how it supports sort of sharing knowledge across the industry. So
yeah, it sounds to me like you're very active in multiple levels of connection in the community, really seeking out ways to be constantly inspired. And I think that is something that maybe a lot of people don't find enough time for. So how do you really integrate that into your daily practice of the work that you're doing in the world?
Find your inner child that's curious, right? We as adults lose that quite a bit, and you can get into routines of how things should be or might be, and what we should be measuring and not measuring. So being able to stay curious leads towards that innovation, and combining curiosity with that courage to ask questions. A lot of times people are curious about something, but don't speak up or don't ask that question about what it is. So, it's the two working together, almost against each other, but for each other in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, remaining curious, asking questions. I definitely am known for asking too many questions at times.
It's a good thing. I mean, that's active listening, right? That's what we want students to be. And so how do we model that behavior even in our own design process?
No, and I look forward to asking you more about student voice, but let's get into our topic today about whole school sustainability. What does that actually mean to you?
I think it's definitely an ecosystem of a mindset, right? The whole school sustainability, we can look at that just from a physical space perspective, but if we don't include the organizational culture and the educational program and those opportunities, it's not necessarily embedded or utilized the way that you can really maximize a facility or maximize an environment to create that. So whole school sustainability is an environment that really encompasses all things from organizational, cultural, and that educational program, and then utilizes the facility or the physical space as a tool to work through conversations with students, to lead through a place-based mindset and understanding their context in the world and their context in the environment to help them find that voice of impact, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I mean, I love how you describe that. And I'm always thinking about, like, what are some of the barriers and why people don't really consider that whole school sustainability approach, that real integrated journey from beginning to end? What are some of the barriers you've experienced, and how have you overcome those?
Well, I think it starts with priorities, right? So a priority is a benefit for many, but it also can be a barrier for some. So priorities around the maintenance and the operations, priorities around cost, or priorities around personal initiatives and things like that. So the barriers can be sort of adapted through knowledge, right? I mean, everyone says knowledge is power, and it's about education. And I think that's what led to us developing a research team in-house at LPA, because in order to work through barriers, information became the tool to be able to change the narrative and really open up perspectives to something that might be a broader conversation. And I think also just the market impact, right? I remember years ago where it was, well, LED lighting is too expensive, or that material is unavailable or has a longer lead time. And so some of those barriers, the more we push with each decision, becomes something that starts to make that really move in the right direction.
Can you, I mean, this is interesting, because I hear a lot of different barriers when we're talking about integrated sustainability from the beginning to the end when it comes to projects, and what gets dropped off at what time to compromise during the process. What would you tell other planners that are out there in terms of what are, like, besides research and data and tools, what are some of the things that they could do, creating the vision from the beginning, setting the priorities? What are the parts in between, and how do you hold it right to the end?
Well, it starts with that belief in the beginning. It has to be something that the team themselves want to be able to maximize, right? So if that becomes part of your design process or your planning process as a belief system, then you can start to create goals and ownership, and then that co-authorship with your clients or with your design team members that you're working through or with. But those goals really give any design team or any planning team the opportunity to hold each other accountable. We were working with a project here in San Antonio, and at the early stages, we were walking through their campus and looking at the existing conditions. And a lot of times, we as planners and facility designers look at, the condition of the systems, the condition of the quality of the materials, and then the next layer is the educational program and how suitable it is for what the goals are and what we're trying to achieve as a bigger vision, and what the board and the district is trying to achieve. But if you add a sustainable lens to that too, and say, how is this supporting a healthy environment, or how is this supporting a more resilient future? That analysis in the beginning, before you're setting targets and goals, can lead to often an accountability method that can be instilled at every conversation. So for that project example, it was great. The goals were really around, they had no daylighting. Not one classroom had a window. So it was about providing daylight for 100% of the classrooms, knowing the impact of that. They had safety and security concerns, and that was really about access control and the traffic flow. And then just a concern about culture. You walked through the campus and every sign said, no students here, or don't do this and don't do this, but nothing actually said, here's your permission to be who you need to be and to do this. And you could feel it. So setting those goals and talking about that, to ask a lot of questions early on, starts to become the avenue and the vehicle to make decisions down the road. And that's really where you can embed those and create those new priorities around what those futures could look like.
It makes me think about, when you think about best practice and leading clients through those experiences, I'm imagining, as you've gone through this journey, that each time you're learning something new and taking it to the project, do you find that having those examples for net new clients or net new projects that you're working on really help them to see, yes, daylight is important? Which, having access to all areas is important. As you're building that along your journey, you're finding that even more and more important in your work?
Yeah, and we have to, as planners and designers, and I'll go back to that point about curiosity. Curiosity can't be just at the beginning when we're anxious to learn about someone or their culture or their community. It really has to go all the way past the project, that post-occupancy process. So, a lot of times we talk about the lessons that people carry in their minds, and each individual has experiences from their projects where, I learned this there and I can contribute that. But unless we put all of that information together, how are we really sharing that with the broader industry? And so doing the post-occupancy evaluations, we've learned that we can expedite some of that knowledge gain, right? And so then you can share that and also connect people back to other clients that have been through a similar example. And so it's not just reciting the facts or the data, but it's storytelling through that post-occupancy and being able to recall and connect and network each other together to say, here's something that we learned through this analysis, or here's something that we took away from those projects. And so that curiosity that I spoke about at the very beginning has to be something that you come back to and go, did my project work? Did our goals meet the targets that we set them out to meet? Are we performing at a higher level of energy utilization in the campus? Are the collaborative spaces really working to the full utilization that they were intended to design around? So going back at the end to be able to analyze how things performed can be a really big contributor in those conversations to take information to the next project, right?
Yeah, that post-occupancy piece is such a vital part to kind of capture the so what at the end. It leads me to thinking about, was there a moment when you decided, I cannot design a project without an integrated sustainability approach in mind?
I can't think of a moment because it was always part of our vocabulary. Even at LPA, we have an integrated discipline team. So we come from, multiple mindsets and perspectives, and have our engineers or our landscape designers are at the table at the beginning of that process, and programming, not even when you're putting pen to paper. So when we set goals at the beginning as an integrated team, you have a different perspective to be able to achieve something that you wouldn't be able to achieve necessarily doing it in isolation, right?
Right. Yeah, I hear you on that, but I wonder, why do you think some of the other planners are not really focusing on having it at their core? What barriers do you think that they may be seeing? Or is it because there is a lot of cost-cutting exercises that have to be done, or accommodations for other things? Like, how do we help others really understand how important this work really is?
It's about each project at a time, right? I think one project at a time. So for each planner that's going through, looking at the holistic journey of what that sustainability might look like, it has to become something that becomes part of every beginning conversation, right? And that's where I go back to that that belief and that ownership, because if you don't have that belief individually, then how will you lead through that? So the barriers might be other priorities, which are still important, the design aspect, the materiality, everything that you can gain from knowledge and experience that we bring from an analytical mindset to planning and programming, but also coming back to that user experience and understanding what contributes to, learning outcomes and the learning progress, and how that research really plays a role in that. And so I think the tools that we can develop are really about sharing those resources so that you're armed with information to be able to make better decisions throughout the process.
Yeah, that is so true. I couldn't say it better. One project at a time, to really identify what's possible, to share those successes, to share those resources and those tools, and to build upon that. To me, that is something that I truly believe in every single day, and we do the work here at Naturopod. Coming back to where you see the industry right now, like, where do you see it's right now, and where do you hope it goes in the future, the ideal state?
Well, I think we're in that pivotal moment. We're coming out of one of the most global, change moments of certainly of my career, right? And so at this point, it's one of those opportunities to utilize a catalyst and say, how might we do things differently? What have we learned from conditions that have happened over the last year. It's been a very reflective year for many, I think, right? So where the industry is right now, as you look around the country and around the world and see a lot of challenges that we have with environmental challenges, as we see challenges with resiliency in buildings or facilities and communities of how they can be supported. We just came out of that conference that we did with the schools as center of the community, and all of the things that contribute to a learning climate and a learning environment, and aspects that really do show that there's a greater need, and we have to be able to reflect on some of the challenges that have been easy to ignore or easy to put behind us because we do what we do and this is how we do it. And so this was an interruption in that normal day-to-day process. And so we have to be able to utilize this interruption and reflect and look at this and say, how can we now redirect and course correct where we're taking things with the built environment and the impact on the environment and our impact to our learning and teaching opportunities. We just gave a presentation last week at the CASH conference about the impact of facilities on educators. And educators are often left behind in the conversation, right? Yeah. So we always talk about design with the student in mind. And I left the conference with a very cheesy quote about, but you can't leave the educators behind in that process because they have an understanding and awareness of their physical space. And Casanova's research, right, talks about when you have educators involved in the co-authorship and the design, it empowers them to have agency over their space. Yes. And so we have to treat educators' school design as their workplace, and how are we providing space for them to collaborate and space for them to work together as peers and space for them to be able to have all those wellness aspects that we talk so much about with students, right?
Yeah, I think about educators a lot, and often, obviously one of the hot topics we're going to cover today is student voice, including them a part of the process. For me, when I think about educators, I think about how every single one of them is holding those children in those learning environments. And if they're not inspired to be in that space for themselves, for whatever reason, whether it's access to natural light, opening a window, having a plant in the background, the simplest of things can make all of the difference to a space for them. So I always think about designing for the community, designing for the educator, designing for the students. Can you tell me about a time when you really did involve the educators first and then the students, and kind of what happened there?
Yeah, there's many examples, because sometimes it's students first and sometimes it's educators first. But I want to use an example, East STEM Academy, which is in Corona Norco Unified School District. This was a project where, the challenge was overcrowding. So basic challenge was we need more classrooms. That's where it started. But the process was a community and educator-led process where we had almost 50 individuals contributing as a cross-section of representing who the district, what the district's needs were. And so we started to look at how could we take this overcrowding challenge and create something that's really unique and special in the environmental, context of what the site needed and what the site demanded and what the program could afford. So we went through, we partnered with University of San Diego and Dr. Julie Kramer, and they did an exercise with students talking about what they wanted their students to know, do, and be, and what was the heart of the matter. So that really defined those learning outcomes. And then those learning outcomes defined the teacher activities defined the resources defined the space. And so you can start to see this iterative process. And all of this was done in just a month or two. But it was a deep dive of, tours. It was a deep dive of, all day workshops and live sketching, talking about the relationship with the academy to the other campus. And there was a change management process that was part of that for a lot of the educators that were involved. It was about, coming out of kind of my space as a teacher. That's where a lot of teachers come to the table. What do I need? And not in a selfish way, but in an expert, as experts, right? They know their environment, they know their setting, but really being able to explore together other perspectives and other voices. So we had community members and industry members talking about, what the opportunities were locally from careers, right? So how could we shift the educational environment to support something that prepares students for what they're going into? And so the educators really became the designers and we became the instigators in that conversation. And so the execution of that process and that project, and it's been open now for a little over a year. And it's just really great to see how the students' voice is empowered, how the educators are utilizing their professional development space. We're going to go back there in about a month to go visit and kind of look at how they're rearranging furniture after COVID now, and talk a little bit more about that. So I think it's just a really key example where the educators were really empowered. And there's a lot of flexibility, so that as geospatial beings, right, we need, in order to be content in our environments, we have to feel that we have control over it. So a lot of times when we talk about flexibility, it has to be beyond just, movable furniture. It has to go deeper into the agency of that, and the opportunity to create, and the permission to have that agency over the space.
Yeah, the permission and to be curious, right?
Yes, that's going to be my word for the day.
Yeah, curious is our word for the day. As I'm hearing you speak about this, and you mentioned about the time that it took, a month and a half, to engage the educators in this process and to do the tours and to go and really have them a part of that. Am I hearing that it's actually, from your holistic sustainability journey, is that now part of your best practice flow with all the projects moving forward, is to engage them in that process?
Absolutely. And it's scalable, right? So, and one of the things, when we were working with Santa Clara Unified and doing Ag News Campus, it's a K through 12 campus. And so at that point, it was a different conversation. There were conversations about, like you mentioned earlier, the budget constraints, the schedule constraints, the site constraints of the project, and all these other drivers. And so what's important as planners is to pause before reacting and problem seek in order to problem solve, because we often think, we come from a world of solving problems, right? We want to be able to come in, roll up our sleeves, trace, draw, and design something, engineer something, and solve it. But I'd encourage anyone to pause first prior to solving those problems, just to be able to explore a little bit and use those moments to kind of define the guiding principles of a project. Even if you're not doing a planning project, if it's starting at schematic level, how do you design a process that facilitates guiding principles so that those can be drivers throughout the rest of the conversations? So yeah, it's definitely become a best practice. And at Ag News, I have to share, that one was, we tried to make it very memorable. So our principles were actually SMART. It was sustainable, mindful, adaptable, resilient, and transformational. So everyone on our team member, could recall what those were and ask ourselves, were we making those decisions each time throughout the process?
Wow. This is really inspiring. And I think about, like, okay, so how can we actively listen, like really actively listen and pause to educators and students? Is there a moment in time that you could share with us you think that there is, like, that sweet spot, or that aha, or the so what?
Well, I think active listening has to be something that we take through every stage of the project, right? So it might not be just at the beginning. It has to be something that's throughout all of those, and being able to read I don't know if it's reading the room or reading the dynamics between different individuals that are in the decision-making process. But really being able to say, have we explored all of the opportunities in a way that empowers all the voices that could be at the table, right? We talk about engaging stakeholders early and often. So it's not just early and it's not just often, but that there's those moments where you can have a proof of concept and make an impact in kind of decision making. And so at the very beginning is certainly key to that, to set those drivers and those principles, but it also has to be something that's threaded throughout sort of the entire process. So we talk a lot about, modeling the type of environment we are trying to accomplish. So if a district's goals are around creating something that's flexible and collaborative and adaptable and resilient, how do we design a process that is all of those things as well, so that we have all of those conversations throughout the entire stage of it? So it's really not about one moment, but about the mindset.
Yeah, you make it sound so easy, Kate. I think you make it sound easy because you're so clearly passionate about really identifying the holistic approach, both from a communication standpoint, the community engagement, including the sustainability part, which I think sustainability is something that is often just loosely used. And it's deeper than that, right? It's so much more integrated in those pieces. But I know as planners and as designers, often research is something that is built on a foundation. When we spoke, you mentioned about the net zero article, the catalyst article. Are there any other resources out there that you kind of go, hey, planners, check this out, read this, get inspired by this? I mean, of course, you're inspiring, but what other parts are there out there for them to look for?
I think you have to find your own inspiration through that. So I think I'll go back to being reflective in that moment of how am I kind of executing and leading in a sustainable mindset, and am I bringing those conversations to the table? There are a lot of resources, but it's really about how you kind of reach out and understand maybe where the industry can go, right? Not necessarily where things are headed, right? Or where things are at this moment, but where you really have the opportunity to take things. And, being able to have conversations with your team first, to be able to say, where are we in that? I think the Center for Green Schools does a lot of work on sustainability. I know Cynthia Uline wrote a book called Leadership for Green Schools, and that's a great resource that could be kind of a learning opportunity for both planners and educators. And so there's a lot of aspects that you can look to, but I don't think that there's just one resource or even a handful, because it has to be something that's personal to each designer or to each planner and how they're going to contribute that, because sustainability is such a broad perspective. And oftentimes it's, what does that mean to our client? Not walking in there with the predetermined context of what that means as designers or planners, but really trying to understand what are the priorities and what does that definition look like for our clients, and how can we help sort of pull out that information through the process and then refine it through that design decisions.
Right. So refining, meeting them where they're at and helping them to go a little bit step further.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I hear that in the words that you're sharing. And I think about, it's the themes that I'm hearing from you is really everybody is a unique learner. Everybody has a unique need. Every district or school that you're creating is somewhere, from their perspective, how do we help integrate them and lead them to the next stage? What I want to know more about is, setting the stage for the future around sustainability. If you're to look 5 years from now, what are the things that you're doing to help stretch your knowledge, stretch your goals, so you can look back and go, hey, I'm so glad I did this because now we've changed that?
Yeah. Well, as a firm, we've signed on to the AIA's 2030 commitment, right? So it's really how we're reducing energy consumption to get to zero. So that becomes something that in, no less than 5 years, but certainly by 2030, we're really looking at what are we doing today to make an impact in the future, and using tools and resources like Climate Studio or Revit 360, and really understanding how that energy can have an impact in that environment. So when you think about, where we want to be in 5 years from now, it really has to be something that sort of shapes where do you want to be in 10 years from now, because 5 years is going to be here very quickly. And so it has to be, starting today, right? Walking away from every time we leave sort of a retreat or summit, it's what am I going to do Monday morning? What am I going to do on Monday to change the course of this? And again, I go back to that one project at a time, because each project has the ability to make that impact. And you have to be able to isolate individual projects to be able to achieve larger goals, because each of them have those opportunities to kind of keep pushing the envelope, quite literally, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
There's a lot of things that we do naturally as designers, and we do because we were, trained that way, or that we can be more efficient with planning, right? So everything from that orientation to the footprint of any environment and how the outdoors are connected to the interior design or to the architecture, all of those become extreme opportunities in guiding towards a more sustainable future. I'd love to see program documents. We've really been exploring this, but when planners are creating their program documents, program the outdoor spaces, right? Put a square footage to that, put a capacity of how many students, define the activities that could be happening in those spaces, and then start to demonstrate to your clients and your teachers, educators, students, how that contributes to the entire environmental of the educational program. It's not just the indoor spaces, but the outdoor spaces as well.
Yeah, it's an integrated approach to indoor and outdoor learning, hearing the voices and the needs of the whole community, the educators and the students.
Right.
It's inherent, right? And I can see that you embody all of that. How can we help others to really feel that sense of excitement? I know it's a daily practice, as you mentioned. It's a unique approach, really pausing and listening, which is a part of it too. But sometimes you, as planners, you have incredible deadlines and construction things to meet. So what would you say, like, you know, if you were to really prioritize the key things, what would you say are the must-haves and the ones that you can kind of like, you know, not a huge priority right now, but as long as we take care of these things?
Yeah, I think it's if there really is a challenge, and if there are those roadblocks or whatever might be sort of the disconnects between anything, it's being able to start small and being able to plan efficiently and make wise material choices, right? The smart decisions that go into material decision making, both from that architectural scale and the structure of something, you know, how you can do a loose fit, long life type of structure so that there's adaptability in the future, or even just the material choices on the interior and the lighting and reducing your, you know, the lighting power density, right? How do we look at lighting as something that's experiential, but also is operational, and understanding how to put those two things together. So start small, find something, and research that avenue, right? So if it's materials, if it's the scale of the context of the site, if it's something that has to do with energy and lighting power density, that's definitely a way and an avenue that you can create more conversations around sustainable futures.
Yeah. And would you say that student voice is a non-negotiable?
Yeah. So, you know, whenever I talk about starting small or setting goals and setting priorities, that really influenced a lot of the work that we started doing several years ago when we added our LPA Red team, which is our research, education, and design, by setting goals at the beginning of the project. So we ask every project team to set 3 goals. It's very simple, right? So human experience, health and wellness, and performance. So if you can set a goal in each of those categories, you'll not only connect both the high performing to high utilization and high environments for sustainability. So the experience there that you mentioned in student experience and student voice, that usually falls, at least in our K through 12 market, as a priority in that human experience and how we're empowering the users for a more sustainable future. So that's definitely the pathway to being able to create a goal around sustainability for experience related items.
Yeah, I think about that too, because we were recently involved in a student voice project, and one of the students said, I can't wait to come back in 10 years' time and say, I helped create that.
Yes.
And to me, that's about sustainably building community, because they're going to come back and inform those students. Peer-to-peer communication around the design, the space, and the adoption is something that you can't put a value on.
Yeah. And we have a different generational expectation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people talk about digital natives and what students kind of have today and what they're coming to the table with. They're demanding a more intentional design and a more sustainable facility and behavior and culture. So it has to be, like you said, a non-negotiable in those conversations, and their voice. You know, a teacher once said to me, we don't have to help students find their voice. They have it. We just have to listen. And I've carried that, you know, mindset with us in other conversations, because it's important when you engage students in the design process that the activities that you engage students in isn't too prescribed that it's not valuable, right? So if you're asking students, where do you want to put this chair? Where do you want to put this? What would you put on that wall? You're already limiting them to the form of some environment or the form of some space. You have to really go through more of a activity and experience mapping to say, who are you? What's important to you? And what does a day in the life look like? What does it look like today? And what do you want it to look like? So we've done this exercise. We did it in Austin ISD, where we had both educators and then students go through a day in the life of a persona of a student and talk about, from the moment they wake up and their pre-visit to school, right? That pre-function time. And then when they're going home or leaving, and what that trajectory looks like, and how often they're outside between classes, how often they see their friends or they socialize and they have those collaboration moments, what inspires them, when they're hungry, when they feel overwhelmed. And so that's started to shape conversations about adjacencies before we put a floor plan together, because then you start to look at what could be connected to what, and how can we, back to that story at the very beginning of our podcast here, where I talked about awareness and my own behavior and recognizing that in space. We have the ability as space designers to also design behaviors, right? So you can design and encourage behaviors through how you put the components together of any facility. So
yeah, encouraging choice, encouraging freedom, encouraging creativity, recognizing the students are truly capable. When I think about the students that we interviewed over 100 students for our student design project, and we tried to look for some similar themes, which we found. But the point that you mentioned earlier about everyone has a unique view or a unique need, it just became so apparent that, it's actually not easy to design for a collective community, but design for choice. Would you say that resonates with you as well?
100%. Yes, I could not agree more. Choice, even as we revisit our own work environments, right? Yeah. We've all kind of worked from home, and some may have done that before the pandemic, but certainly after, as we're re-entering, there's a lot of choice that's been given to even the workplace environment. And so how we bring choice into our conversations about design, but I'd caution anyone to be too overly flexible in their environments. There still has to be specialization and intentionality behind design, because that can fail easily if something is trying to do too many things, right? Especially when we look at larger spaces like, the dining commons and student unions and libraries, still have intention with those and make sure that there's moments for those reflection and moments for that collaboration, so that it's not they're not competing with each other. Something can be too flexible and not actually be functional.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I think about the way I like to look at it is like, how can we create to be a holder of space? When you walk into a space, you feel held and nourished so that you can flourish in whatever unique way that you want to be.
Yeah.
Right. So I think about that. So Kate, when you wake up in the morning, because I hear that you kind of take it day by day, but you've got this deep passion about the work that you're doing. When you're brushing your teeth, and I love asking this question.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I know. I mean, is it something that you're thinking about to kind of get you started for the day?
I think about my team, honestly. It's really about empowering them to have that perspective, right? So in an integrated firm, we have multiple voices at the table, and it's about reminding our designers that they come to the table with thoughts and opinions. And we shared recently, going back to the post-occupancy, we were doing a study about collaboration and the spectrum of what collaboration really is. And it's not a moment in time. It's really about that beam work and then the teamwork. And so you have to be able to have this focused perspective and your point of view, come to the table with a point of view. So a lot of the times in the morning, what I'm thinking about is who do I need to talk to today? Who needs that boost and who needs that encouragement? And then that really kind of guides sort of the morning, right? In a lot of ways.
That's wonderful. Team empowerment and leadership. That's a real clear indicator of leadership. Is about empowering and opening those possibilities. What would you say is next for you? And one of our final questions here is, what's next for Kate?
Oh, that is tough, man. I would love to take the work that we're doing with our research team and be able to broaden that reach. We utilize the research that we do mostly internally and mostly for our clients, because we haven't looked at it as anything that's about marketing or anything from that perspective. So it's really been focused on how it helps bring knowledge and information to the decision making on each project at a time. But there's so much knowledge that we've gathered over the last 10 years. And so I think what's next for me is being able to share that at a more national and international level, to be able to take a lot of that work on the road and expose the knowledge that's been gained through these, explorations and the analysis, and certainly utilizing the work that we're doing in our teams about our sustainable action plan, right? That's something new that we've been refining over the last year, and how to create that at any community level. And so really working with communities, across the board to understand what's important to them and how to empower their voice.
I love that you want to share your knowledge and experience, Kate, because that collectively can really make a difference for future generations. And I can't wait to support you on that journey. I think that's when we can all come collectively together, go, how can we make a difference? How can we share the importance of this information? So thank you so much, Kate. Like, again, as always, a true pleasure to connect with you today.
You as well.
Oh, and thank you to our audience, for listening and being a part of this. If you've got any other questions around sustainability as an integrated approach, please reach out and let us know. And we'll see you next time. Take care and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.